Fresh potatoes harvested from your garden taste much better than anything you can buy at the grocery store. So sit back and enjoy today's episode on how to grow potatoes in raised beds. So our first step is to prepare the soil in our raised bed. We already have a lot of compost and organic matter added to the soil, and what we are doing here is adding some azomite, which is volcanic rock dust, into our raised bed. This will provide a lot of nutrients that the plants need to grow, and the potatoes should do very well with this added in the soil. Now you need to make sure that this is very well mixed into your soil, and if you're using organic matter, just make sure that you add it well in advance so that there's some time before they are available to the plants. And now let's start planting these potatoes. These are seed potatoes that you can find in your gardening stores, garden centers very easily. Now you can also buy potatoes from your grocery store and plant them, but just make sure that you're buying potatoes that have not been sprayed by growth inhibitors. And if you go to some organic grocery store like Whole Foods or your local farmer's market, you might get those potatoes. But most of the grocery stores spray their potatoes with growth inhibitors and you won't be able to grow them. But the best choice is to buy these kind of seed potatoes from the gardening centers. They're mostly available around January here in Southern California. And what you do is you just plant them a few inches deep. And this method of growing potatoes is the hilling method, where we will be not planting the potatoes very deep, but we will add more soil and hill those potato plants as they grow up. Now, if you don't want to do that, what you can do is plant your potato sets very deep. And I'm talking about like at least 6 to 10 inches deep, and then cover it with soil. And they will take time to grow, but that's an alternative way of growing potatoes, which we will try in the next season. And these are the seed potatoes, as you can see here. And after about 42 days, the plants will grow into new growth that you see here. And at this time, it's a good idea to add some fertilizer. You can add some complete fertilizer like the one you see on the screen, or you can use a tomato or vegetable fertilizer. They will grow very well. And you can see that the plants will continue to grow. Make sure that you choose a spot that receives at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight every day. And you want to make sure that your plants get plenty of sunlight. Now here is one problem that you might see with growing potatoes, and these are the potatoes that grow above the soil level. And we just got a little delayed in hilling these potatoes. And what we're going to do now is try to salvage these by covering them with some soil. But you need to make sure that no potato grows outside or exposed to the sun. And that will make sure that you have potatoes that are not toxic. And we'll talk a little later on how you should avoid harvesting these kind of potatoes. And this is the hilling technique. What we do is once the plants grow to about 4 to 6 inches, you can add some soil. I'm using some potting soil here. You can use compost, you can use peat moss, coco coir, whatever you have available. Some kind of organic matter that will protect these potato plants. And by hilling these potatoes, what happens is that most of the potatoes that grow are covered. They're not exposed to the sun. And that way you get a better harvest and you don't get potatoes that are toxic. So this is a good way to grow your potatoes when you're growing them in containers or raised beds. But if you're growing them in the ground or even on raised beds, you can try planting them deeper. That's an alternate way to grow potatoes. But in this hilling technique, we are adding organic matter, as you can see here, and trying to make sure that we hill each and every plant. Now let's talk about watering your potato plants. Now potatoes grow very well during the spring season, which is not too hot and not too cold. So in Southern California, the best time to grow potatoes is from January through May. And during this time, you can water them every 3 days or so during the growing season. Now when it's too cold or cloudy, I try to not water the plants. But usually when I'm growing potatoes, I see that I usually water them about 2 to 3 times a week along with the other vegetables. And these are set up on a micro drip irrigation spray here, as you can see. And potato plants do not like a lot of heat, so you will see that by the time summer approaches, your plants will start dying. And that's why it's better to plant them around January or February, depending on your area. In Southern California, that's the time to start it. And once you hill your potato plants, they will start producing potatoes very soon. And if you see that your potato plants are flowering, that means they're doing very well. That's a healthy plant. And the fact that they've also started producing tubers or their potatoes. And this season, our potato plants did not grow like 100% well. They looked a little bit stressed. And I think that's because we had a few days of very high temps and then very low temperatures. So that's probably why our potato plants were not at their best. And once you finish hilling the potatoes, an important thing to do is to wash away the extra dirt that's there on the plants. That's to make sure that your plant doesn't get any kind of diseases with the soil that's left on the plants. So just make sure you wash them very well, you water them well. Now this time I grew potatoes only in the compost that I added to the raised bed as well as the azomite. I did not add any fertilizers to grow the potatoes this time, and we're going to see how that works. Now this potato plant is a variety that produces small potatoes. It's called the white superior variety of potatoes. So it produces small to medium sized potatoes and they're very delicious. So if you go to the grocery store next time, check out the potato varieties and look for the white superior varieties. They will be a little different from the other varieties that you see, but they are not as large as some of the other potato varieties like the russet potatoes and some of the other varieties. Now as you can see here, the potato foliage has started to die. At about 120 days, you can see that a lot of the potato plants have completely dry leaves and the plant is gone. And I usually wait for about 2 to 3 weeks after this to harvest the potatoes, but I do like to dig them out all at once so that I can have space for the next crop. So we're going to be looking at how these potato plants grow in the next few days. We have stopped watering these potato plants, as you can see here. They're pretty dry, and this is because the potatoes need about 2 to 3 weeks to grow before we start harvesting them. So at 128 days, we are finally harvesting our potatoes. You can see here more than half the plants have now died. And when we dig up the potatoes, we're going to be finding the potatoes that have grown around the plant. Now, potatoes do not grow very deep into the soil. They do grow around the plants, as you can see here. And they're right about at the place where we planted them, a few inches deep. And then the soil that we hilled is something we're taking out right now. And this once again is the white superior variety of potatoes. These potatoes don't grow very large like the other varieties like the russet, but they are absolutely delicious. And when you grow potatoes in your home garden, and especially when you're not using any pesticides or fertilizers, or you're just basically just growing a potato by planting it into the soil, you can expect to get about 3 to 4 potatoes per plant. Now if you get more potatoes, that's good for you. You've got a good harvest. And usually the yield is more when you're growing in native soil in some areas. But otherwise, don't be disheartened if you don't get a big harvest. When you're growing plants at home, you're able to experience the freshness and goodness of growing these at home. So it's not really a race to grow a bumper yield or a large harvest. What you want to get is a decent harvest which you can use, consume within your family, and of course if you have extra, you should be sharing that with your friends and neighbors. Now as you can see here, we have begun harvesting and we still have a few plants to go, and so far it looks like a decent harvest. And these are the potatoes that we harvested from a 16 square foot raised bed. Now the volume is not that high, as you can see here, and what we're going to do now is wash them very well. These are still quite a lot of potatoes that, at least our family can consume for the next 1 or 2 months at least. So it's a decent harvest, and we're not going to be storing our potatoes now. We're going to be consuming all of these potatoes pretty quickly. So after washing them, all we're going to do is dry them a little bit in the sun, just so that they form a little bit of a cover, but you don't really need to keep them out for a long time. Now, as you can see here, we have washed up potatoes and we're going to put them back in this bucket. And here is how it looks like when it's dried. And this is our harvest, and it's a pretty good harvest. And they are absolutely delicious potatoes that will serve us for a long time. And these are the potatoes that I was telling you about, and these are green in color and they're not so good for you. So if you see such kind of potatoes, just make sure that you discard them. Even if you have a little bit of green on any of these potatoes, they're toxic and they should not be used. So there we have it, folks. That was our episode on growing potatoes using the hilling method in raised beds. Let me know what kind of potato varieties you like to grow, and let me know if you have grown potatoes this season or are you planning to grow them now, and what varieties are your favorite varieties. We'll see you again soon. Happy gardening.